Modern economies look stronger than ever. Markets still function. Banks still operate. Money still moves across the world in seconds. From the outside, the system appears advanced, resilient, and highly managed. Yet beneath this surface, something has quietly changed. Small shocks now create large reactions. Local problems spread globally. Stability feels temporary rather than durable. What once absorbed stress now amplifies it. This video explains how modern economies became so fragile. Not because of a single mistake. Not because of reckless decisions. But because of structural changes that slowly reshaped how economic systems work. When strength starts creating weakness. Fragility does not come from obvious failure. It often comes from success. Modern economies did not become fragile by accident. They became fragile while solving real problems. Over time, systems were redesigned to be more efficient, more connected, and more responsive. Each improvement made sense on its own. Together, they changed how economies behave under stress. One of the most important changes was the shift toward efficiency. Economic systems once relied on excess capacity, extra inventory, redundant supply chains, large buffers of savings and liquidity. These buffers were expensive. As competition increased and technology improved, inefficiencies were removed. Just-in-time production replaced stockpiling. Lean operations replaced redundancy. Capital was kept working rather than sitting idle. This made economies faster and cheaper. It also made them sensitive. When buffers shrink, tolerance for disruption disappears. Small interruptions now have larger effects. Another major change was increased interconnectedness. Modern economies are deeply linked. Supply chains cross borders. Financial markets operate continuously. Capital flows connect distant regions instantly. This interconnectedness improves growth. It allows specialization. It spreads opportunity. It increases overall efficiency. But it also transmits stress. When systems are tightly connected, problems do not remain local. A disruption in one area quickly affects others. Interdependence replaces isolation. What was once contained becomes systemic. Another structural shift was the expansion of financialization. Finance became more central to economic activity. Markets grew in size and influence. Credit expanded. Financial instruments multiplied. This allowed risk to be priced, traded, and distributed. In theory, this made the system safer. In practice, it changed incentives. Economic outcomes became increasingly tied to financial conditions. Asset prices influenced behavior more than fundamentals. This increased sensitivity to market fluctuations. Another key change was the reliance on debt. Debt became a primary tool for managing growth. Households borrowed to maintain living standards. Businesses borrowed to expand. Governments borrowed to stabilize economies. Debt made growth smoother in the short term. It also increased long-term vulnerability. Debt pulls future income into the present. As debt grows, flexibility shrinks. The system becomes dependent on favorable conditions continuing. Another change was the expectation of stability. Repeated interventions reduced volatility. Crises were softened. Markets were supported. Liquidity was provided. This was often necessary. It also altered behavior. Participants began to expect stability. Risk felt manageable. Disruptions felt temporary. This expectation encouraged exposure. The system adjusted around the assumption that shocks would be controlled. Another structural shift was complexity. Economic systems became more sophisticated. Layers of regulation, instruments, and institutions were added. Complexity allowed fine-tuning. It also obscured cause and effect. Understanding the system became harder. Participants relied on models and abstractions. When systems are hard to understand, early warning signs are easy to miss. Another important change was speed. Information travels faster. Markets react instantly. Decisions are made quickly. Speed improves efficiency. It also reduces reflection. Adjustments that once took months now happen in minutes. This compresses time. Errors propagate faster. Recovery becomes harder. Another shift was the concentration of power. Economic influence became centralized. Large institutions, major markets, and key nodes gained importance. This concentration improved coordination. It also created single points of failure. When central nodes experience stress, the impact is widespread. Another factor was the erosion of slack. Slack allows systems to bend without breaking. Over time, slack was removed. Idle capacity was seen as waste. This made systems appear stronger. In reality, it made them brittle. Another change was narrative confidence. Economic narratives emphasized control. Policy tools were seen as effective. Models were trusted. Outcomes felt manageable. This confidence reduced caution. Risk was discounted. Exposure increased. Another shift was the decline of localized resilience. Local systems became dependent on global ones. Communities relied on distant supply chains. This increased efficiency. It reduced independence. Local shocks became global issues. Another factor was uneven adaptation. Some sectors adapted faster than others. This created imbalance. Pressure accumulated in less visible areas. Because impact was uneven, recognition was delayed. Another change was memory loss. As time passed since major crises, lessons faded. New participants entered the system. Old warnings lost relevance. History became abstract. This made repetition easier. Another factor was regulatory lag. Rules responded to past problems. They were less effective against new ones. Risk migrated to less regulated areas. This created blind spots. Another shift was the normalization of fragility. Conditions that would have seemed risky earlier became normal. Boundaries moved gradually. What once raised concern became routine. This normalization hid vulnerability. Another factor was incentive misalignment. Short-term success was rewarded. Long-term stability was abstract. This shaped behavior. Risk accumulated quietly. Another shift was delayed feedback. Consequences arrived later. Behavior did not adjust in real time. The system drifted. Another factor was optimism bias. People believed disruptions were unlikely. This belief was reinforced by stability. Each calm period strengthened confidence. Another shift was the illusion of control. As systems functioned, participants believed they understood them. This belief reduced caution. Another factor was structural rigidity. As systems optimized, change became costly. Adjustments were postponed. When change finally came, it was abrupt. Taken together, these changes reshaped modern economies. They did not make collapse inevitable. They made systems sensitive. They made stability conditional. They made fragility possible. Modern economies became fragile not because they failed, but because they succeeded in becoming fast, efficient, and interconnected. Efficiency replaced resilience. For most of economic history, systems were built to survive disruption. They were slower. They were less efficient. They carried excess capacity. That excess capacity was not waste. It was protection. Over time, modern economies began to value efficiency above all else. Efficiency reduced costs. It increased competitiveness. It improved short-term performance. This shift did not happen suddenly. It unfolded gradually, driven by technology, globalization, and financial pressure. Each step made sense. Each step removed a layer of protection. One of the clearest examples is supply chains. In the past, businesses held large inventories. They planned for delays. They accepted idle stock as a cost of reliability. As logistics improved, this changed. Inventory was reduced. Delivery became precise. Production was synchronized. Just-in-time systems replaced stockpiling. This lowered costs. It also removed buffers. When supply chains function perfectly, efficiency is high. When disruption occurs, there is no margin for error. A small delay can halt production entirely. Another area where efficiency replaced resilience is finance. Banks once held larger capital buffers. Liquidity was abundant but underused. Over time, capital was optimized. Assets were leveraged. Returns were maximized. Idle funds were minimized. This increased profitability. It also increased sensitivity. When leverage rises, tolerance for loss falls. Small shocks have larger consequences. Another shift occurred in labor markets. Flexible employment increased efficiency. Costs became variable rather than fixed. This improved adaptability in stable conditions. It reduced security during stress. When demand slows, adjustment is immediate. This accelerates contraction. Another area affected is government policy. Budgets became tightly managed. Deficits were minimized during growth periods. Spare capacity was reduced. This created discipline. It also reduced response options. When crises occur, policy space is limited. Responses become reactive rather than preventive. Another efficiency-driven change is specialization. Regions specialized in narrow functions. Global trade made this possible. Specialization increased productivity. It also created dependency. If one link fails, the entire chain is affected. Diversification declined. Another shift involved financial markets. Liquidity was optimized. Assets were priced precisely. Markets assumed continuous functioning. This assumption holds during calm periods. During stress, liquidity disappears unevenly. Prices adjust violently. Another example is corporate balance sheets. Companies reduced cash reserves. Capital was returned to shareholders. Idle cash was seen as inefficiency. This improved returns. It reduced flexibility. When conditions change, options are limited. Another efficiency shift occurred in energy systems. Reserve capacity declined. Production matched demand closely. This reduced costs. It increased vulnerability to shocks. Another area is infrastructure. Maintenance was deferred. Capacity was stretched. Short-term savings outweighed long-term resilience. Another shift involved information systems. Automation increased speed. Decisions became data-driven. This improved accuracy under normal conditions. It reduced human judgment during anomalies. Systems responded faster than understanding. Another efficiency-driven change is risk transfer. Risk was moved rather than reduced. Insurance, derivatives, and financial instruments spread exposure. This appeared to make systems safer. It also obscured concentration. During stress, correlations rise. Risk returns all at once. Another shift involved consumer behavior. Credit replaced savings. Consumption became smoother. Households became sensitive to income disruption. Another area is urbanization. Dense systems increased efficiency. They also increased interdependence. Disruption spreads faster. Another efficiency change is time compression. Speed became an advantage. Long-term planning declined. Short-term optimization dominated. This reduced foresight. Another shift is cultural. Efficiency became a virtue. Redundancy became a flaw. Slack was criticized. This cultural change reinforced structural change. Another consequence is fragility amplification. When systems lack buffers, they amplify stress. They cannot bend. They break. Another effect is cascading failure. One failure triggers another. Interdependence magnifies impact. Another consequence is recovery difficulty. Efficient systems recover slower from disruption. They lack spare capacity. Another outcome is perception mismatch. Systems look strong until tested. This creates false confidence. Another effect is policy misjudgment. Indicators reflect efficiency, not resilience. Warnings are missed. Another result is behavioral rigidity. When efficiency dominates, adaptation is slow. Another consequence is loss of optionality. Choices disappear quickly. Another effect is dependence on stability. Systems require calm conditions to function. Another outcome is reduced tolerance for uncertainty. Small uncertainty causes large reaction. Another effect is hidden vulnerability. Weakness accumulates unnoticed. Another consequence is threshold behavior. Systems tolerate stress until they do not. Then adjustment is abrupt. This is how efficiency quietly replaces resilience. This trade-off does not cause crises by itself. It creates conditions where crises escalate quickly. Modern economies are efficient. They are also sensitive. This sensitivity defines fragility. When interconnection turns local stress into systemic risk. Modern economies are no longer collections of independent parts. They are tightly connected systems. This interconnectedness is often presented as strength. It enables trade. It spreads innovation. It allows specialization. But interconnection changes how stress behaves. In loosely connected systems, problems remain local. In tightly connected systems, problems travel. This is one of the core reasons modern economies are fragile. Financial systems provide a clear example. Banks, funds, and markets are linked through credit, derivatives, and liquidity flows. Each connection increases efficiency. Each connection also creates a transmission channel. When one institution experiences stress, others are affected immediately. This does not require failure. It only requires uncertainty. Liquidity moves first. Confidence follows. Another example is global supply chains. Production is distributed across countries. Components cross borders multiple times. This reduces costs. It also means disruption in one region affects production elsewhere. A delay in one node becomes a bottleneck for many. Because chains are optimized, alternatives are limited. Adjustment is slow. The effect spreads. Another area of interconnection is capital markets. Capital moves globally. Investors rebalance portfolios instantly. This creates integration. It also creates synchronized behavior. When risk perception changes, markets move together. Diversification weakens during stress. Correlation rises. Another example is currency systems. Exchange rates link economies. Capital flows influence domestic conditions. Policy decisions in one country affect others. This creates spillovers. Local policy becomes global influence. Another form of interconnection is information. Markets react to shared signals. News travels instantly. Narratives spread quickly. Expectations align faster than before. This accelerates behavior. Another example is debt networks. Borrowers and lenders are interconnected. One default affects balance sheets elsewhere. Exposure is layered and opaque. Uncertainty spreads faster than loss. Another area is institutional interdependence. Governments, central banks, and markets interact continuously. Actions in one domain affect others. Boundaries blur. Responsibility diffuses. This complicates response. Another interconnection is behavioral. Participants observe each other. They adjust based on perceived consensus. This creates feedback loops. Actions reinforce expectations. Another example is infrastructure dependence. Energy, transport, and communication systems are linked. Disruption in one affects others. Recovery requires coordination. Another area is technological integration. Automation connects processes. Failures propagate automatically. Human intervention lags. Another interconnection is regulatory alignment. Rules are harmonized. This reduces arbitrage. It also synchronizes vulnerability. Regulatory blind spots become shared. Another example is corporate concentration. Large firms dominate supply and finance. Their stability matters disproportionately. Their stress becomes systemic. Another interconnection is monetary policy. Global liquidity cycles affect all economies. Interest rate changes ripple outward. Local conditions respond to global signals. Another area is social expectation. Economic confidence spreads socially. Fear spreads faster than fundamentals. This amplifies reaction. Another example is market structure. Passive investing links asset prices. Flows matter more than valuation. This increases sensitivity. Another interconnection is political economy. Economic stress influences politics. Political responses affect markets. Feedback loops form. Another factor is complexity. Interconnection increases complexity. Complex systems behave nonlinearly. Small causes can produce large effects. This unpredictability increases fragility. Another consequence is opacity. As systems connect, visibility declines. No single participant sees the whole picture. Risk accumulates unnoticed. Another outcome is speed amplification. Interconnection accelerates response. There is less time to adapt. Another effect is loss of containment. Problems cannot be isolated. Fire breaks disappear. Another consequence is shared vulnerability. Strength becomes mutual dependence. Another outcome is cascading failure. Failure in one area triggers others. Another effect is policy difficulty. Intervention in one part affects others. Unintended consequences increase. Another consequence is delayed recognition. Stress builds quietly. Impact appears suddenly. Another effect is illusion of stability. Interconnection masks fragility during calm periods. Another outcome is synchronized stress. Adjustment happens everywhere at once. This overwhelms capacity. Another consequence is recovery challenge. Restarting interconnected systems is complex. Dependencies slow normalization. Another effect is heightened sensitivity. Minor disturbances matter more. Another outcome is systemic exposure. Risk is embedded everywhere. This is how interconnection turns local stress into systemic risk. Modern economies rely on connection to function. That same connection ensures that stress spreads quickly. Interconnection does not cause fragility alone. It magnifies it. Why fragility is hidden until it's too late? One of the most dangerous features of modern economic fragility is that it remains invisible during normal times. Fragile systems often appear strong. They function smoothly. They respond quickly. They recover from small shocks. This creates confidence. The problem is not that systems fail often. The problem is that they fail suddenly. Fragility hides behind stability. As long as conditions remain favorable, weaknesses remain dormant. This makes early detection difficult. Another reason fragility is hidden is delayed feedback. Many decisions produce consequences far in the future. Debt accumulates slowly. Risk builds gradually. Incentives distort behavior over time. Because consequences are delayed, behavior does not adjust. The system continues on its path. Another factor is measurement bias. Economic indicators focus on output, growth, and efficiency. They rarely measure resilience. They do not capture buffer strength. They do not reflect adaptability. This creates a distorted picture. Indicators signal health while vulnerability increases. Another reason fragility remains hidden is narrative reinforcement. Positive narratives persist. Growth stories dominate. Stability is emphasized. Risk is framed as manageable. These narratives shape perception. They influence decision-making. They reduce caution. Another factor is institutional confidence. Policymakers trust tools. Models appear robust. Past interventions reinforce belief in control. This confidence delays acknowledgement of limits. Another reason is normalization. Gradual change feels normal. Boundaries shift slowly. What once seemed risky becomes accepted. Because change is incremental, it feels harmless. Another factor is comparison bias. If conditions improve relative to the past, risk feels reduced. Absolute vulnerability increases while relative performance improves. This masks fragility. Another reason is selective attention. Attention focuses on visible success. Warnings are dismissed as pessimism. Signals that contradict the dominant narrative are ignored. Another factor is complexity. Modern systems are hard to understand. No single participant sees the whole system. Risk emerges from interaction, not isolated parts. This makes fragility difficult to locate. Another reason is diffusion of responsibility. When many actors are involved, responsibility is unclear. Each participant assumes others are managing risk. Collective exposure increases. Another factor is incentive asymmetry. Short-term rewards are concrete. Long-term risks are abstract. This skews behavior. Risk accumulates quietly. Another reason fragility remains hidden is uneven distribution. Stress affects some sectors before others. Early impact is localized. Broader consequences are delayed. This delays recognition. Another factor is intervention masking. Policy actions reduce volatility. They smooth outcomes. This hides underlying imbalance. When support is removed, fragility is exposed. Another reason is historical distance. As time passes since major crises, memory fades. Lessons lose urgency. Risk tolerance increases. Another factor is moral hazard. Expectation of support changes behavior. Risk feels insulated. Exposure increases. Another reason fragility stays hidden is optimism bias. People believe adverse outcomes are unlikely. This belief is reinforced by stability. Another factor is adaptability illusion. Systems adapt to small stress. This creates confidence. But adaptation to small stress does not guarantee survival under large stress. Another reason is feedback suppression. Early warning signals are muted. Noise increases. Signals are drowned out. Another factor is scale. As systems grow, impact increases. Small vulnerabilities scale into large consequences. Another reason fragility remains hidden is threshold behavior. Systems absorb stress until limits are reached. Beyond those limits, adjustment is abrupt. Another factor is reaction speed. Modern systems move fast. Recognition lags response. By the time fragility is visible, behavior has already changed. Another reason is political framing. Acknowledging fragility is costly. Stability narratives are preferred. Warnings are softened. Another factor is confidence inertia. Confidence decays slower than reality. It holds until it breaks. Another reason fragility is hidden is survivorship bias. Systems that survive reinforce belief in strength. Failures are seen as exceptions. Another factor is path dependence. Once systems are built, change is difficult. Risk accumulates along the chosen path. Another reason is false precision. Models give specific outputs. This creates trust. Uncertainty is underestimated. Another factor is delayed consequence amplification. Small early choices produce large later effects. Cause and effect feel disconnected. Another reason fragility stays hidden is adaptation lag. People adjust only after visible change. This delays response. Another factor is social proof. People look to others for signals. As long as behavior appears normal, concern feels unwarranted. Another reason fragility remains hidden is crisis labeling. We call it a crisis only after collapse. Before that, it is just normal conditions. This linguistic delay affects perception. All of these factors combine to conceal fragility. Modern economies do not signal vulnerability clearly. They signal strength until they cannot. By the time fragility becomes obvious, options are limited. This is why modern economic crises feel sudden. The fragility was always there. It was simply invisible. Modern economies did not become fragile overnight. They became fragile slowly, quietly, while appearing stable and successful. Efficiency replaced resilience. Interconnection replaced isolation. Complexity replaced transparency. For a long time, these changes worked. Growth continued. Markets functioned. Shocks were absorbed. But beneath the surface, tolerance for disruption shrank. Fragility does not announce itself. It hides inside systems that appear strong, until the moment's stress becomes impossible to contain. Understanding this does not prevent crises. But it explains why they feel sudden, why they spread quickly, and why responses often come too late. This channel focuses on calm, long-form explanations of how money, power, and economic systems really work beneath the headlines. No predictions. No advice. Only explanation. If you want to understand the systems shaping your world, consider subscribing. New documentary videos are released regularly. Thank you for watching.